Okay, here we are going into City Bible Church in Portland, the mothership for Ministers Fellowship International. And there you see is the dome. It's a dome. It's got a Christian school, Bible college. It's quite the complex. Jesus, we worship you, Lord. Love you more than life.
Everyone give the Lord some praise this morning. tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone written by the finger of God. And we have now a picture of two different tablets and two different things that have to be written on. And the idea is that the same finger of God that came down out of heaven and wrote on the stone the law is the same finger that comes down out of heaven and writes on your heart grace. It's the same finger. It's the same author. And what really moves me is the permanency of the work. Because when God comes down out of heaven and he writes upon the stone, the word here in the Greek is the word that means to engrave, to dig in with your finger or a tool, and to make it permanent. Everyone say permanent. The permanency of the word moves me because when I look at something that's written in stone, God didn't come down out of heaven and say, hey, let's photocopy the law for Moses. Let's photocopy it. Let's stamp it. Hey, Moses, get your finger paints and let's do some hieroglyphics. No, he came down with his holy hand and ripped it into the rock and he wrote in stone and he made it permanent, the permanency. And just as permanent as that was in the rock, so is the work of grace on your heart. Amen. God's work is not supposed to change. God's work isn't supposed to disappear. We're not supposed to walk away from the altar and forget that it happened. It's real. It's permanent. It's God. And it doesn't change. We look at the word permanent just for a second because I think this is important. Permanent means to exist or function regardless of unforeseeable events or conditions. And without the ability to return to a former state, I have no choice. I cannot go back to the way that I was. I can't. I remember when I got saved, I will never be the same again. I remember in my years in Bible college, almost 14 years ago now, I remember when God spoke to me and did a work in my heart at a retreat. I still remember the atmosphere. I still remember the message. God's dealing with me with some of my issues. If I'm going to go forward in my life, God's got to deal with me. I go out to Candy Grove. Pastor Kenwell is preaching. He's preaching on Daniel chapter 3. He's talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they went into the fire, and their arms were tied, and their legs were tied around the turbans, and they went into the fire, and then he made this statement that changed me forever. God wrote on me that day. He comes out, and he says, when you are in the fire with Jesus, the only thing that burns are the things that have you bound. And I remember at that moment, at the altar, as things just began to fall off of my life. And I got up from that moment, and I want you to know, life has not been easy the whole time. But the work that started right there at that altar has never changed. And the great thing about being a Christian is that once you're solid, Hebrews talks about the anchor to your soul. Listen, it doesn't matter what you go through, you can make it through. And things are different. I remember 3 years ago when my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and she walked in with a little pink piece of paper, and she said, Doug, the doctor's given me 3 to 36 months to live. The work of grace has been in my family now, my whole family, for almost 10 years. And I remember seeing the look in her eye when she told me she had cancer. And I want you to know it was a different look than I'd ever seen in the eyes of my mom. Because it wasn't necessarily a look of fear. It was a look of grace. God, I need your grace and I need your mercy. Regardless of the circumstance or the unforeseeable conditions, regardless of any of those things, we won't change. God is sitting on the throne of our lives. And at that moment, we begin to pray and we're crying a little bit. We're crying out to God. Here I am, 36 months later, and my mom just had a blood work done. By the way, she's